Hey everybody, I'm not Childish Kevin, and Why Me is a story really of my life's experiences and how I became more immature, really at a higher level of immaturity. Um, I'm going to do a little side note here. I want you to know that while I was in high school, I actually was involved in track and cross country. And during some other videos, I'll probably talk about that. Also, I still had a lot of things going on at home. I was involved in cattle showing and farming and some things with the church. Um, and I was building myself a car before I was even 16. But today, this might be the last one about high school in general. And this is going to be all about one teacher in one program that I had. My last 2 years of high school, I went to the VOTEC, Vocational Technical Institute or whatever of Carroll County. And I took up auto mechanics. I also took up auto body as a summer course. But anyway, this is about how they can put a teacher in a position where by the time you're done, you probably have you've probably learned more wrong things than right things. And if you're not a little bit intelligent and question how things happen and why you end up walking out of there thinking that the way this guy ran this class was the way things were supposed to be. And that, you know, as a mechanic in this case, that's the way you're supposed to act and the way you handle things. When I started this course, I was probably the only person who actually, you might say, studied automotive. I wanted to know as much about cars as I could, and mostly for drag racing purposes, but you know, just about anything. And if you understood how a race car engine worked, well, you knew how a regular engine, you know, street car worked. So I'm going to say that actually I was the most educated in the class. The other guys were basically starting from ground zero. They had done little to have any knowledge of cars, except that a few of them knew that was a Ford such and such made from year so and so to so and so, and it, you know, had this engine in it, and if you ask them, well, you know, was it a overhead valve? Was it an overhead cam? Was it 2-barrel, 4-barrel? And they wouldn't even know what you were asking. So I'm starting out you know, and as I'm going through the class, I'm realizing that I, you know, get the best scores on the tests, and I'm, you know, and I'm being able to answer his questions. But when it comes to going out into the shop, I always have my own work. In fact, I mentioned that I had a car I was working on. Well, I brought the engine in there to disassemble it. That was one of my first projects. And as I'm tearing it apart, this engine is in bad shape. It was amazing how much it was worn. But this was something that I didn't know how to judge. I couldn't tell just by looking at a greasy old motor whether it could get away with just a hone or whether it had to be rebored. I didn't know whether I had to line bore the crankshaft or whether, I mean, the crankshaft journals or not. You know, that kind of stuff was something I hadn't had specific information on. And it takes equipment to measure that kind of stuff too. So I finally get this engine apart, and this teacher tells me that, oh yeah, says you can just use a rigid hone and that'll be fine. So that's what I do. And I hone on that thing for days, and it's still not cleaning up. But I finally get the opinion that it's good enough to reassemble. And so here's my first complaint about this guy. He had no clue what he was talking about, because after I put that engine together, yes, I did get it to run, but in around 2,000 miles, I took that engine back apart, and every one of the rings was broken because it needed to be bored. And in fact, with a 40 thousandths overbore, it still didn't clean up perfectly. Now, that man should have known that. That shouldn't have been an issue at all. Also, the crank wouldn't spin, wouldn't rotate. That's because it needed to be line bored. No, that was fine. Well, wipe the bearings out on it. That's the reason I ended up taking it apart to start with, because the bearings were shot. And this guy is my teacher, and he has been hired by the county to be the one and only automotive mechanical teacher in the county. Now, I don't know where they got this jerk, but that's all he was. So now let's talk about some other things about him. I never got an A from him the first year. Now, you get scored or graded 4 semesters, and or 4 marking periods is what they called it. And I never got an A. So starting the second year, I asked him, I said, what's it take to get an A in this class? I said, what's the problem here? I said, I feel like I scored the highest on all the tests, and I go out here and I'm working constantly, and yet you give me a B, and I see other guys getting A's. I said, no, it doesn't make sense to me. He says, well, you need to do work, you know, that I bring in. I said, I do. He says, yeah. He says, but you're always doing your stuff. I never have an opportunity to put you on something that I want and to see how you do. And at first, it didn't sound right, but I said, all right, you know, let me at it. I said, give me some work in. You know, and so he started giving me jobs to do, and I pushed all my work aside. And one of the first jobs he gave me was to do a front end alignment on this 1972 Pontiac station wagon. And I pulled it onto the alignment machine, and we have these plates that tell us where to make the settings. And I went to him, I said, look, we only have up to 1971. I said, this is a 72. Oh, don't worry about it, 72s are the same. He says, just use the 71 plates. All right, so I go back, I use those plates, and I do my alignment on it, and it was off, you know. And so and this guy, this teacher, had just put new tires on this damn thing. Well, it wasn't long and that car was back, and them front tires were shot. They were wiped out. And I thought, well, I know I did everything right, and I put it up on there, and I checked it, and I was right by the plates that I used. Here's the problem. Between 71 and 72, they went from bias belted to radials. Completely different alignment requirements. So I felt pretty stupid. I shouldn't have trusted him, but I could have looked it up. I could have used just numbers out of a book, but I didn't do it. So when I looked it up, sure enough, there it is, and I pointed it out to him. I said, you told me to use those. Oh, yeah, well, they changed it. So I felt like crap because expensive pair of tires just got wiped out, and he had to put another pair on, and I realigned it. And I heard him talking to the teacher and he blamed the mistake on me. That ain't much of a teacher in my opinion. He just taught me that I didn't want to be around him at all. First off, he totally led me wrong on my motor, and then he's gonna tell me about this crap, and I hear him talking, and maybe it's just joking, but he said, he says, if I would just make one run from Colombia up here with a suitcase full of cocaine, he says I could retire. Well, I don't think that's quite what a teacher ought to be talking about, and especially out in the open, even if it was a joke. This guy, he was the joke. I just never met anybody like him, and so I got a real attitude about him, of course. And the kind of the final straw was whenever it was time to clean up, the first thing I would do is I would go back and I'd wash my hands, because to have a greasy pair of hands and you grab a broom, who wants to get a hold of a broom is full of grease? So anyway, one day I'm back there washing my hands, and he comes back there and says, "Ain't time to leave." I said, "I know." I said, "I'm just washing my hands." He says, "You got to clean up first, blah blah blah," and he's giving me a hard time, and I had enough. So I explained to him why, and I took care of my job, and I did my cleaning and all that stuff. And then I went up and I went to the principal. Now this is the principal that I, of course, got in trouble with for doing the burnouts with the car, my brother's GTO. Of course, he wasn't going to have anything of it. Now, he knew he knew this guy was a jerk, but he supported him 100%. So I learned something else that day. Even if you're right, you may be treated wrong. Didn't teach me to never do what's right, but after several times that happening to me, I started thinking whether I should do what's right or whether I should do what's wrong. Because just like that guy blaming me for his mistake as a teacher, now he could at least, shared the mistake with me. But no, he's going to put it all on me. That's the way our government is. That's the way a lot of people are. Even when they're older, they can't admit they're wrong. They can't admit they made a mistake. The sooner you start learning how to say, okay, I made a mistake, the better things are going to be for you as far as internally. The stress you'll have will go down. I recommend trying it. It still hurts. Nobody likes to be wrong, but that guy, he he really gave me an attitude, you know. Oh, I'm going to point this out too. I didn't get any kind of an award for my automotive talent. It went to another guy, which that was fine. I also found a way to get a job outside of the Votech as soon as possible so that I didn't have to deal with him anymore. But in my machine shop class up at my high school, I got the Industrial Arts Award. I had made a set of rocker arms from scratch. I designed them and I built them. So in the senior year, where I was a dud in one place and maybe looked at as, you know, incompetent in another area which was very similar, I scored the highest and got a very high award for it. So I just want you to kind of see that that even though in other words, I wasn't just a goofball that wasn't capable of doing good work. I knew how to do it. I guess I'm trying to justify myself. So, and thanks for letting me share. Talk to you later.